session, we are going to talk about the how can we name the compounds. What does it mean exactly, the compounds? Now, in the periodic table, inside the periodic table, there are a lot of elements. For example, you have nitrogen, you have hydrogen, you have iron, Na, sodium, Ca, calcium, Au, gold, Ag, silver, and so forth. Okay? Many elements inside the periodic table, and each element has individual name, like an individual formula. For example, you have N, this is for nitrogen, H for hydrogen, Fe for iron, Na for sodium. Okay? What if we have a compound like this one here? Okay? For example, NaCl, CaO, H2SO4. Those are compounds. How can we name the compound exactly? We know that CNA is sodium, Cl is chlorine, but if we have NaCl, how can we name that? This is the topic of this session. Now, to do that, or to know how to do that, the compounds, there are two types of them. Okay, we have the ionic compounds and we have the covalent compounds. The ionic compounds, as we know, it's between metals and non-metals. Okay, for example, you have NaCl. Okay, you have NaCaO, for example, here. Okay, so that's ionic. Why? Because it's between metal and non-metal. Na, for example, that's a metal. Cl, that's a non-metal. Ca, metal. O, non-metal. So that's ionic. Covalent, between non-metals and non-metals. C for carbon, non-metals. O for oxygen, non-metals. So that's a covalent one. Okay, so that's the difference between the ionic and the covalent. Now, let's start with the ionic one. Let's start with the ionic compound. How can we name them? For example, if you have NaCl. Okay, so how can we name something like that? We start basically with the first one at the left side, which is Na. Na is sodium, so we write it sodium as it is. Okay, the second one at the right side, it's called chlorine, Cl, chlorine, like that. Now, what do? We just cancel the INE at the end of the name and we add chloride. We add IDE. Okay, so it's gonna be sodium chloride. Another example, if you have NaBr, so Na is sodium, so we write sodium. Br for bromine, like that, with INE at the end of the name. So we write it bromide. We cancel the INE and we add IDE. So it's gonna be sodium bromide. Okay, this method is applied in the whole ionic compounds in the chemistry. Every ionic compound named by this method. Okay, for example, if you have something like that, CaO. Now Ca is calcium, so we write it calcium. Okay, like that. O for oxygen. Okay, so what do? We cancel the GEN at the end of the name and we add IDE. So it's going to be oxide, calcium oxide. Okay, but what if you have something like that? For example, Fe2O3. Now you have an ionic compound, but not like that. So let's take another example, not write this one right now. You have Al2O3. Okay, now you have numbers inside the ionic compound. That's an ionic compound. Al is metal, O is non-metal, so that's ionic. As we know, that's ionic. But we have numbers here. We have 2 and we have 3. Okay, Al2 and oxygen 3, O3. How can we deal with that? Basically, we don't do anything with them. As it's just like as we didn't see them. Okay, we just leave them as they are. So we write as we do. Al is aluminum, so we write it aluminum, like that. O for oxygen, so we write it oxide, like that. So it's going to be aluminum oxide. What about the numbers? We don't do anything with them. Okay, because we don't pronounce the numbers in the ionic compound. So it will be aluminum oxide. Okay, another example, if you have something like that, Cl or CaCl2, the same thing, Ca, which is calcium, so we write it calcium. Cl2, which is Cl is chlorine, so it's gonna be chloride with IDE. We don't deal with the two numbers here, we just leave it as it is. Okay, so this is the ionic compound. Now, what if you have, this is, okay, this is just for the ionic compound. Now, let's go to the covalent one. How can we name the covalent one? For example, if you have something like that, let just me change the color here. If we have something like that, CO2, how can we name something like that? That's first covalent one, not ionic. Okay, so how can we deal with it? How can we name it? Basically, you have the same thing. C for carbon, so we write it carbon like that. O for oxygen, so we write oxide like this. Okay, but in the covalent one, we are going to deal with the numbers here. We will pronounce the numbers. Now, in the chemistry, all the time, we use sometimes, so not all the time, but we use sometimes the Roman numbers. What exactly the Roman numbers here? Roman numbers, something like this. 1, okay, something like that. 1, it's called mono. 2, we call it di. 3, we call it tri. 4, we call it tetra. Okay, 5, we call it benta. Something like that. Okay, also there is 6 hexa, 5, 7 hepta, 8 octa, and so forth. We call them the Roman numbers. We use those Roman numbers here in the in naming the covalent one. How is that possible? Now, you have carbon oxide. You have 2 beside the carbon, right? So we write it dioxide. So it's gonna be carbon dioxide. Why it's dioxide? Because we have 2 beside the carbon, so we pronounce it in the covalent one. So it's gonna be carbon dioxide. If you have something like this, for example, SO2. So S for sulfur, so we write it sulfur. O for oxygen, we write it oxide. We add IDE, but we have 2 here, so it's gonna be dioxide. Sulfur dioxide. What if you have something like that? NO. That's covalent. So you have N, it's a nitrogen, so we write it nitrogen as we do. O for oxygen, we write it oxide. Here, like that. Oxide. Okay, sorry. Oxide. But there is no numbers here beside the oxygen or beside the nitrogen. But if you have no numbers here beside the oxygen, it means you have 1. But we don't write it 1. We don't write 1. Why you don't write 1? Because we just know that there is 1 here, but we don't write it. So if you don't have any number, it means you have 1. 1, it's called mono, so it's going to be mono. Monoxide. So NO is going to be nitrogen monoxide. Again, NO2. So it will be nitrogen, okay, sorry, nitrogen here. So it will be nitrogen dioxide because we have 2, okay? If you have something like that, NO3, so it's going to be the same thing, nitrogen trioxide. Trioxide, like that. Okay? Nitrogen trioxide. What if you have something like this here? N2O5. How can we name that? So, you have 2 beside the nitrogen, right? Okay, so we write it, we pronounce it. So 2, it means di, so we write it di. Okay? After that, we write the name, which is for the N, for nitrogen. So we write di-nitrogen. Okay? And then 5 is benta. So we write it first, benta. Benta what? Benta oxide. Like that. So it's going to be di-nitrogen benta oxide. Okay? This is how can we name the compounds here. Okay, so there are two different types of the method. Two different types of the methods, so we can name the compounds: the ionic one and the covalent one. The ionic one, we don't pronounce the number. We just say the name as it is, and we add IDE. Okay, we add IDE. So CaO, for example, calcium oxide. Al2O3, aluminum oxide. CaCl2, calcium chloride. But in the covalent one, we do pronounce the numbers. Like for example, SO2, that's sulfur dioxide. NO, nitrogen monoxide. NO3 or N2O5, dinitrogen pentaoxide, because we have two and we have five. Okay, this is it. This is how can we name the ionic compound and the covalent compound. Thank you for your watching and have a good day.